on this edition of the Self-Publishing Show.
You know, when Coca-Cola launches a new flavor, they wouldn't do so without asking some consumers first. And you should think the same way about the book market, in essence, if you approach it from a publisher mindset almost.
Publishing is changing. No more gatekeepers, no more barriers, no one standing between you and your readers. Do you want to make a living from your writing? Join indie bestseller Mark Dawson and first-time author James Blatch as they shine a light on the secrets of self-publishing success. This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Hello and welcome. It's the Self-Publishing Show with James Blatch.
And Mark Dawson.
And I think my tummy rumbled just at that point. I do apologise if you're listening on headphones. This is the show. We're here on Friday. We have an interview with Alex Newton in a moment. We're going to look at a statistical look at COVID, how it's impacted here, and the takeaways, because we are not out of this by a long stretch. Certainly looking at the American figures at the moment, South America as well. We have some way to go. And who knows, there may even be a second wave. So just being business savvy about what's happening and what areas perhaps you can focus on is, I think, going to be the takeaways for today's interview coming up in just a moment. Also, there will be a webinar to go with this. So that will be part of the SPF University, not a real university. That's coming up on Wednesday, July the 29th. So that's next Wednesday if you listen to this on the Friday that it's released. If you're not already in the SPF University, you can go to selfpublishingformula.com/SPFU free. It's free for everyone. And once you're in for life during this period of lockdown and COVID. Once we start coming out of that, that will go back to being a premium add-on for a course purchase. But for now, you can go to selfpublishingformula.com/SPFU free and join us on Wednesday night for some really good analytics with Alex. This is it is a dry subject, no question about it. But goodness me, Mark, how important is it to understand genre and categories when we're marketing our products, our books?
It's very important, and although it is dry, remember this is going to be leavened by Alex's famous Germanic sense of humour. The Germans are very famous; they're famed for their sense of humour, aren't they, James?
They are. We roar with
Alex is very funny. Alex is very funny.
Alex is a very funny guy. He lives in Switzerland now. He's neutral on the whole subject of humour.
Yes.
And other things. Good.
You've conveniently forgotten we've got 4 Patreon subscribers to thank. So I'll do 2 of them and you can do 2. Okay, so
have you chosen your 2? Have you?
Yeah, I have. Yes. So thank you very much to Glenn Knock and Rob Nesbitt. Thanks for supporting us on Patreon. James, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mark. I also would like to welcome from New York Kelly Parowski. I think I said that okay. Parowski. And also, this is
good
a
luck.
difficult one. Yeah, thank you. Deaglan O'Hodder. No, I don't know. Oh my goodness. Someone made this. Catherine's made this up.
No,
Deaglan, I do apologise.
I'm sure that's
O''A''AODHA. Oda.
I have said that I have never seen a surname quite like that before, but thank you very much to Deaglan and to Kelly. We're very grateful, and apologies. It's part of the course now. We are going to massacre people's surnames. So
Kelly Parowski is now a walk in the park compared to Deaglan.
That's easy peasy. Yes, the others.
Hodor. It's a bit Game of Thrones, isn't it? Hodor.
I think we should probably let's move off that. You've already offended more than enough for one episode.
Do drop me an email. Explain to me and be brutal how much I murdered your name, and I will give you another shout out with the correct pronunciation. I'm sensing some Gaelic influence in that name.
I think so too.
Okay, look, let's talk to Alex Newton. So Alex, as you may know, runs K-Lytics. He does explain at the beginning what K-Lytics is, but he basically is a detail man, a data man, and he uses data to tell stories about our industry and provide very useful streams of information that enable us to really market our books. But we wanted to talk to him with this sort of view he has of what's actually happened with book sales, about COVID and its impact on the industry in which we are in and we're selling into. So here's Alex Newton.
This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Alex from K-Lytics, the man with 2 names actually, Newton and the original German.
Which is Nihus.
Nihus.
And nobody can pronounce it nor spell it.
I like it. Nihus is a good name. But anyway, you've made it easy for us because you know that we're simple creatures, particularly in Britain, where we just shout loudly at people who don't speak English. That's how we're taught in schools. So thank you for making it easy for us. Welcome back to the Self-Publishing Show. Alex, you are the data guy at the center of this publishing universe publishing revolution. It's fascinating talking to you, and no more interesting time than on the back of a massive disruption to world economies. And self-publishing and publishing generally has not been immune from what's happened with COVID-19, but it's perhaps not had a devastating effect that it's had in other industries, such as the service industry. And that's what we're going to, I think, have a look at with you. But I tell you what, why don't you start by just reminding us of who you are and who K-Lytics is?
Well, of course. First of all, great to be back on the show. We've been working together now for a couple of years. And how did I get into all this? I wanted to publish myself some years back in the big Kindle gold rush times. But being a data person, I've worked, for big companies all my life, analyzing data and solving complex problems. Looked into all this Amazon data and found, wow, there is something to be said about data. So we started doing these basically reports about genres, about categories, almost 6 years back now. And we've been tracking them ever since. Every month, thousands and thousands of books to generate insights to make your publishing and writing decisions hopefully easier and faster. So we dig through all this data. Why? So that you don't have to.
Yeah, superb. And the data, as long as you understand how to use it and apply it, can be a very powerful thing. This is we hear this talked about all the time. It's a data world. Often it's talked about in quite negative terms, actually. People who are talking about Facebook privacy and stuff. This is, data is the new currency. But there's a strong element of truth in that, isn't there? Data is a form of currency in our world now.
Well, it is a form of currency, and sometimes I don't like, these big terms such as big data and deep analytics, because in the end of the world, I've been doing this, for 25 years, and what you do is, you look at large amounts of data and try to find patterns in it. And I refer to myself also more like a strategic market researcher, because, when Coca-Cola launches a new flavor, they wouldn't do so without asking some consumers first. And you should think the same way about the book market, in essence, if you approach it from a publisher mindset almost.
Yeah, which is something we do talk about all the time, that the publishing industry has perhaps traditionally asked authors to do things the wrong way around, where they write their book in isolation and then, having completed the product, then try and sell it to the industry. Whereas, as you quite rightly say, Coca-Cola wouldn't launch a drink, General Motors wouldn't launch a car, Hobbs Hoover wouldn't launch a vacuum cleaner without doing a ton of market research. So by the time they built the product, they know they're building a product that there's demand for. We don't do it that we tend not to do it that way around traditionally in publishing. We just write what we want and then hope that somebody wants it. Where you are giving people the ability to really steer the creation of their product, and I'm going to call it that because it is a product, steer the creation of that to a demand area in the market.
Exactly. And obviously we don't advocate the approach where people only look at the numbers and then, try to write Amish romance when they have no clue about how to write it. So it's still about marrying your love, passion, and knowledge about a certain genre area with, market niches and pockets of demands that hopefully are not overcrowded.
Yeah. I am in love with Amish romance.
Me too. It's on my shelf.
I still feel the big Amish love story is yet to be told.
That is true. Although I'm more into Amish cyberpunk, which is like the next big thing.
Yes. Love it. Okay. Right. Let's move on to our subject in hand, which is really looking at the data and trying to work out what happened and is happening still. So we're recording this interview at the beginning of July. I've no idea really when it's going to completely. It's tailing off. You've just been on holiday in Europe. I'm about to go on holiday in Europe, which was unthinkable 6 weeks ago. But we don't know if there's going to be a second wave. So I'm not going to say we're looking back at the end of this process. We're looking back at the end of the first, certainly the first peak. And what impact did you see COVID-19 having on self-publishing?
Well, there were multiple effects about genres, about formats, about categories, about the whole industry. And I think it's good to start, just to take a backseat for a second, say, well, what happened in overall consumer retail during that period? And obviously, while mid of March things were still going well, there's a market research agency that measures weekly U.S. retail consumption at the point of sale, like out there in the shops every week, and compares it how these sales do compared to the prior year. Back like March 14 this year, things were still like in the positive. And then obviously we know retail sales with the lockdown took this huge hit with, I think it was like end of March, minus 31% in the US. And then April was really bad with, minus 25, minus 20%. But then in May, and I think that is the big surprise that everybody has to look at, is back in May, things broke even again compared to the year prior. And now in June, we saw in US retail, like the June 20 week, US retail sales were 20% up compared to the same week a year ago. It's almost like, people rushing out there, lockdown's over, let's purchase things. And we saw an almost similar pattern in book sales, especially if we start with the print sales. And that was, first lesson I had was that print sales were much more resilient to this whole crisis than we might have thought, right? Because by March, sales had dropped quite considerably, minus 7% print sales, for example, in the US versus the prior month, in 2019, the same month. But then already in May, sales were up 8%. And guess what? In June 2020, almost as we speak, sales were up 13%. And this last week, if we only measure the week, print sales were up like more than 20% versus 2019. And I think that's quite amazing. So we saw a dip in print sale, we saw it in overall retail, but we now see a rebound, which is like unprecedented. I was really surprised to see it.
So one thing, I know you're not an expert in the non-publishing world, but you were referring to retail figures from the States. Is it going to balance itself out? So those dips that we saw are ultimately, if you look at the 6-month average, is it going to look pretty similar to the 6 months of last year?
Well, if we just look, for example, at the cumulative, the first 6 months now, from January to June, if we take print sales in the US, print book sales, they are actually 2% up versus 2019. And I think that says something.
Is that because of print on demand and I guess buying online? Amazon managed to keep itself going. In fact, I think it scaled up during the COVID crisis.
Well, the whole thing was overall increase in demand for books, and we'll talk in a second about eBooks, which were just saw an astonishing, spike in sales and demand overall for electronic reading, for the devices, and also for the reading. So, well, why does it happen? First of all, people were at home. What do you do at home? There's only so much Netflix you can watch. And particularly, we saw things like, books about homeschooling, kids' books, teen young adult books. These were the big genres. And we'll have more data in a second. But that is what happened. And it's almost, if you sit at home and you cannot go out there into the shops, and suddenly you can go out there, you may binge buy a bit whatever you buy, whether it's books or e-bikes and whatever it is. Not eBooks, e-bikes. That's, by the way, a true story. It's an industry that really benefited from all this.
Yes, good investment area at the moment. Mark Dawson has bought a very expensive e-bike, so he's part of that revolution. Okay, well, let's move on to eBooks. You gave us a little preview there of KDP's, how they fared during COVID, and I think the overall impression is they did very well.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a double-edged sword, because you have to look at this from first the overall Amazon or market perspective, then from the individual author perspective. So the first thing we need to note is that, well, it's now month of July, and the numbers have been out for May. The May 2020 KDP Select Global Fund has been $32.2 million for that month. Now, that was the third highest ever royalty payout like 3 months in a row and the highest ever. So from a first point of view, you say, oh my God, this is really great. But in talking to authors, you can look at this a bit like, well, is the glass half full or is it half empty? Because by the same token, during the months March, April, and May, the individual payout per page read, the famous KENPC rate, dropped from, I think in March it was 463 per 1,000 pages read, down to 420 for 1,000 pages read. So that's a 9% drop that individual authors felt. So when we look back into the data over the years, it almost seems that Amazon, when the market grows fast, they are never as fast in adjusting the individual payouts to the authors at the same pace. So while for the individual authors, the page reads were not satisfactorily paid, the overall market grew, and quite considerably so. I mean, if we just look at the KDP Select Fund year to date, it grew like by 21% or so. It's now cumulative for the year 120 million versus 145, 146 for the same period last year. So actually, humongous growth, I'd say.
Yeah, so that's really interesting, and that bodes well for the future. So I had this conversation with Mark, and he said, well, people are reading more because they're in KU and they're locked indoors, so they're reading more, which is why the payout was less. But I also noticed that there's been a very aggressive promotion campaign from KDP to sign new people up to Kindle Unlimited with 2 months free, I think, which is the biggest offer I've ever seen them run. They've probably had thousands of people. Well, it stands to reason from your figures that people are joining KU. It's not simply a case of the existing people reading more. More people have joined KU, and hence the fund is swelling.
Yes, that's presumably a combined factor of more people joining. Actually, when we look during the period at the Amazon bestseller list, but not for books, but for electronics and all the Kindle Fire devices, during the lockdown, you had to get these things for the homeschooling of your kids. You download books, you join Prime, you may join KDP. They had the big promotion. So I think there are a whole bunch of things working together in that increase in demand.
Yeah. Good. Well, as I say, that bodes well for those people who, as you say, saw 0.0045 something become 0.0042 per page. And yes, that makes a few $100 difference a month to authors who are turning over a bit of money. But if that's more people joining, particularly on those free months, a couple of months free, you are going to have a percentage of them will carry on and will feel the benefit. As long as they read your books, Alex.
Yes, hopefully so.
Yeah. Good. Okay, so during lockdown, we know then that there was resilience in the print side of things and an uptick, without question, in the electronic side of things. What were people reading?
Well, that was almost, well, I shouldn't say fun story during a crisis or a lockdown, but it was fun to observe and analyze. Let's put it this way, because the first thing which was quite striking is the first thing that people read had to do with their immediate survival interest, I shall say. So we saw categories which are like totally obscure, like medical eBooks, internal medicine, infectious disease, improve their sales rank by 460% up, A similar category that was out there was, health, fitness, and dieting about respiratory ailments. Respiratory illnesses, these were categories where usually the top 20 bestsellers rank around 120,000 down there in the store, and all of a sudden you have them shoot up into the top 5,000, top 3,000, you name it. So one was that. What we then also observed in the nonfiction area, also an interesting phenomena, was everybody was chasing where do I get the masks if we now have to wear masks. So there is actually a category, medical ebooks, reference books, instrument and supplies, which is like a non-category, and that shot up all the way up where people were researching how to get equipment. So once the immediate survival interest was satisfied, it was also immediate survival interest for parents, books about homeschooling, increased like 30 to 40% improved in sales rank over the last year. So everybody was trying to get settled down. But then I think as things started to get a bit more boring, and by the way, obviously travel books exactly the other way around. So I have actually, for those who watch on YouTube, I have an exhibit here in front of me, Travel Europe, Italy, Florence, which, usually is always high up there in the travel books, and it just took a huge dive. So these were like the immediate things that were happening. What then went on in the story was, well, how do you fight the lockdown blues, right? So people were getting bored, and you see all of a sudden categories such as gardening and horticulture, vegetable, shoot up in the ranks, and then with a bit of a delay, at least a temporary improvement in things like motivation, self-help, fitness books, you name it. So let's put it this way, and we'll get into fiction a bit later in the talk, but the real drastic swings were all happening in the nonfiction area, up and down.
Yeah. And so the people who'd written How to Survive a Pandemic, or How to Make a Face Mask, or How to Homeschool Your Kids, and had those books sitting there gathering dust for a few years, they were ideally placed and suddenly were cashing in through no fault of their own, cashing in on this. What about people who went chasing the wave when they saw the wave coming, scrambled to repurpose their existing content or get something out there? Was that a trend? Was that happening?
It was happening, but we also looked at the sales, and the long story short, ambulance chases really failed. It was interesting to observe, because once you type Corona or COVID into the search bar, you all of a sudden, got lots of suggestions, ranging from coronavirus for kids to, coronavirus days, very obscure, search results suggestions. And then we looked at how many books were actually published during the months of March and April that had coronavirus or COVID-19 as a keyword or a title. And guess what? Usually during like January, it was like 60 titles. Then in March, 873, then more than 1,200 in April. So everybody tried to jump on the bandwagon, but it's fair to say that all of these books, even the highest selling ones, had sales ranks of around 300,000 on the store. So whenever we have a next pandemic, which I hope we won't, don't spend time writing the 500 how to grow vegetables during coronavirus crisis and change your keywords to that matter. I mean, people are not stupid, and these things basically don't sell.
Okay, well, let's talk about what did sell a bit more in terms. You mentioned fiction there, so we had, Mark and I had this conversation at the beginning, and we thought that it was quite unsettling. It was unsettling, and some people took it harder than others. But I like to think I'm a fairly even-keeled kind of guy. But I felt unsettled at the beginning, where suddenly, you had your Prime Minister with a very serious face saying, "Stay indoors, keep indoors," and all that stuff. And I felt that people would not be reading dystopian, bleak, apocalyptic books. I think they would be moving towards happier, sunshiny, either romance or even thrillers, but thrillers that are not related to this kind of global meltdown. But I wonder if in the longer term, the next couple of years, a bit like Japan post Second World War, where there was this, where post-apocalyptic crept into almost every facet of Japanese culture in the 50s and 60s. I wonder if we will now see a resurgence of that. And that's just me spitballing. Was there any evidence that people went happy blue skies at the beginning? Or?
Actually, yes, there was. I mean, aside from like an overall shift in many genres towards the ebook format, the next question was, once you settle down on the format, saying, okay, now I have to read ebooks, the next thing is, what do you actually read, especially if it's for your pastime and trying to get out of the day-to-day turmoil of the crisis. And there were a couple of things to observe. I mean, first of all, the only one genre that really took a huge jump were children's ebooks, right? I mean, that was the one big winner during the time. In fact, the search interest for kids ebooks, by the way, increased by tenfold during a period of 2 weeks on Google. So that was the one big winner, and all of a sudden you did have even there was I even had the screenshot of 1st of May 2020. You had The Bad Seed, a kid's ebook, was the #1 store wide in the Kindle store, and the whole thing was plastered with kids books, both in print and ebook. The Very Hungry Caterpillar made it into, I think, the top 10 or top 15. So the books we read when we were a kid, James, right?
Yeah.
So that was fairly amazing. Now, the swings in the big genres like romance, mystery, thriller, suspense, sci-fi, the one that took a bit of they all took a little dip, romance, mystery at the, due to that increase in nonfiction children's ebooks. Sci-fi and fantasy took actually the biggest hit, although relatively speaking, they stayed up there in the top 3, top 4, top 5 genres on the Kindle store in April. So when we then move forward to, it's now July, yes, kids books were all up there, but they sort of went back into their natural position, if you will, by July 2020. So here in 2020, although even in July, there are still before nonfiction, remains to be seen what then will happen to sci-fi and fantasy. Your question about, well, was it more dystopian? Was it more the happy things? There were a couple of observations. Actually, the overall dystopian category for adults did not do so well. But what happened is that during the time, the overall dystopian romance category, the Hunger Games stuff, had been on a 4-year decline. And then during the crisis, well, I think Suzanne Collins finally launched a sequel, the next in the series. And that then lifted the whole dystopian romance, teen young adult category up. So I think it had nothing to do with the crisis whatsoever, but a renewed interest by readers. That was one thing that was happening. Second thing that was happening is people were putting like safe bets in what they read, right? So that classic, I never had time to read, but now I really wanted to catch up and read the book. So we saw a lot of books that were selling in the past and were deemed to be classics or new classics. They've done well. And within romance, escapism, clean and wholesome romance did incredibly well during the whole crisis. So we did see a couple of these things happening.
Did you spot? You've talked about print being resilient and ebooks having a good time of it. We haven't mentioned audio yet, and I'm wondering if there was a shift between formats proportionally.
Well, there was a shift, and but also interesting to observe was that, and we showed these type of analysis where we looked at the penetration of various formats in the top 100 bestseller lists over the years, and there was always this picture in 2017 where already back 3 years, the format share in Amazon bestseller lists was like Kindle eBooks extremely high in romance, extremely high in mystery, thriller, suspense, and also in sci-fi. And then already before the crisis, that had increased by quite considerably in other genres. And also there was audiobooks by the end of 2019 with a considerable increase in all those top 100 bestseller lists. So squeezing print in the middle. And then when we moved forward and we reran the analysis in April 2020, we saw that basically all genres gained in ebooks, but the audio side actually lost a little bit. So I don't know why. Perhaps it was my hypothesis. Audio books still pretty expensive. So during the time where you watched your cash a little bit or quite considerably for many, that may have been one factor, especially if you're not on a subscription. And the other thing is if you don't have long commutes driving to work, you're no longer listening to the audiobooks.
Okay, so you mentioned some of the genres that have done well. Are there any others we haven't talked about that have done quite well that people perhaps could be writing into now?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, overall mystery, thriller, suspense has been, after a short blip, especially now in June, July, has been doing well again. And there has been an overall increase actually over the last 18 months. So I think you also have to look at what's been happening as a trend through the crisis rather than only during the crisis. So MTS books have been doing well. Within those, I think also not as a surprise, techno thrillers have been doing very well during that time. But also, in many cases, these were trends that already started before the crisis. So take techno thriller as an example. They had a big increase in sales between 2015 and 2018. Then they took quite a bit of a dip, had like 1.5 years of not so good sales, and now they're on the incline again. And sometimes it feels the crisis for some of these trends almost acted like an accelerator, reinforcing a trend that has already been there.
Yeah. Is your hunch that we've picked up more readers as a result of COVID?
I do think so, because just from a demographic point of view, especially with teens who read, it's proven they read more during the crisis. So from the overall demographics point of view, with teens reading again, at least during that time, I think we got more readers on board. And as you mentioned earlier, with the big promotions that Amazon got for the devices and for KDP, I think we picked up more readers.
Good. Well, that's definitely something. That's definitely a trend we're all interested in. Okay, let's talk about pricing. We haven't mentioned pricing yet. Did you notice any trends in pricing?
Yes, and here I think the good news is the laws of supply and demand seem to be working. And again, you have to distinguish the individual author who sits there in his writing cave doing the next promo and pondering, oh my God, my price, my rate has dropped. Shall I lower the prices? So from an individual point of view, prices may go up or down, right? But the question is what's happening in the market overall. Now, we talked about almost 20 minutes how demand overall has increased. So why, if demand goes up, should prices go down? And they didn't. In fact, for example, in romance, which we all know is one of the most price competitive genres, we in fact saw an overall 18 months increase in prices. And again, March, April, May, June, July just reinforced the trends. And the average across the top 100 in romance are now, closing in on the $4.50 mark, while a year back or so that was clearly much further down. And we all remember the times where prices were just around the $3 mark in romance. So prices up in romance. eBooks for mystery, thriller, suspense, pretty stable prices. And in sci-fi also there we saw actually an increase in prices during March, April, June. Now in July we got a bit of a drop down, but that may also be seasonal.
Okay, fascinating stuff. We should mention there are some slides. If you want to hop over to our YouTube channel, you'll see some of this in graphic form. And if you really has whet your appetite for this, we are going to feature you, Alex, on a webinar. You're going to come and join us in the SPF University on the 29th of July. So we'll make sure this podcast episode goes out perhaps the week before. What are you going to do in that webinar?
Well, in that webinar, we're going to take a step back and basically we're going to look at, okay, how can Amazon data help me with my publishing decisions, with my book marketing? So we'll go deep into topics such as categories, category trends, how to read data on individual book pages across whole categories, how to do your research, and basically put some meat to the bone when it comes to this elusive term, right to market. Well, we obviously have the data that really equips you for doing such thing, but also for your more tactical decisions, how to find top selling cover art, how to find keywords, top categories, all these nice things, but also from a longer term trend perspective. So not just tactically in that very 1 second, but how do you read through trends that happen over a longer period of time?
Excellent. That sounds like a really, really worthwhile webinar. One of the problems with talking to you, Alex, is I want to open my Amazon dashboard on the other screen and start working, because I always have ideas, and you've triggered areas. I think I should be doing more on that area and trying to get my campaigns better. But the work that you do in assessing, finding those keywords, finding the genres, pitching your book, it's key work. You can't do that when you've got your dashboard open in front of you. You have to do that in slow time before you get to that point to plan. And it's really useful hearing this stuff on the inside. And so we should say, if you want to be involved in that webinar, if you go to selfpublishingformula.com/SPFU free, all one word, and for a very short time, very short period onwards, unless COVID goes mad again, it'll be the last time you could join the SPFU University for free. Get inside, and that's July the 29th. We will be talking to you, Alex. Fantastic. You better give us a little plug about K-Lytics, because it's a service I know Mark is circumspect about the services. You can imagine once a week we probably get an email from someone saying, I've come up with the most amazing thing every author's going to like, and all you need to do is tell everyone about it, Mark, please. And Mark looks at it and says, yeah, I don't think so. But K-Lytics came along, and Mark is definitely a convert, and I'm privy to some of the back channel conversations you're having at the moment. Some exciting stuff going on between you and Mark at the moment, which will become public at some point. But just talk to us a little bit about K-Lytics and what the service does and how people can subscribe.
Well, so basically, in essence, we look at the performance of thousands and thousands of books, like every month, right? Why? So that you don't have to. Because if you're in your writing cave alone and you just look at your books, your portfolio, you may draw conclusions. But if you have the power of big data, you get very often you get to different conclusions. So basically, we track those, we aggregate the data on the level of categories and of what we call virtual bestseller lists, our own bestseller list for certain genres and niches, because we all know the search results presented by Amazon are sometimes not that accurate. Let's put it this way. So in essence, what we do is we provide individual genre reports, which are like 70-page reports that try to contain everything you need for the marketing in a certain genres or making up your mind about what to write. And for the very professional authors amongst you, we also have a monthly database of all the Kindle categories with their complete performance overview, from sales ranks to pricing to level of competition in the categories. So, and with that, we hope that you can make better and faster publishing decisions and marketing decisions. And I look forward to showing you, obviously, the in-depth view of it in the webinar.
Superb. And I don't think we've talked about the detail yet, but I suspect there'll be a little offer involved in the webinar for the people who come along to the webinar.
And we will. We will.
Good. We'll have that. So come along, get an offer, and get involved in K-Lytics and sell some more books. Fascinating stuff. While we live in interesting times, as the old Chinese curse goes. It's a coincidence it was a Chinese curse, but we have to keep our eyes on the market, and at all times, not just during COVID. There are trends that occur throughout the year, over the years. You've talked about some of those you saw happening between 13 and 15 and how they're on the resurgence. Understanding your market is a key part of being a business person as well as an author.
Absolutely. So, as we said earlier at the beginning, Coca-Cola wouldn't launch a new flavor without research. So let's bring this philosophy a bit into the book market and self-publishing industry as well.
Superb. Alex, thank you so much for coming along. We'll speak to you on the 29th.
Thank you, and see you there.
This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
There you go. There's our German friend in Switzerland, Alex, always welcome on this show. And we are going to have Alex on for some live training next Wednesday, the 29th of July. If you go to selfpublishingformula.com/SPFU free, if you're not already in SPFU, if you're enrolled in any of our courses, you will be in SPFU. You should probably by now have had an email telling you that this webinar is on. And you can come and join us, and you can ask Alex about anything on the night. So if you've got some burning questions about genres or categories or anything like that, or those hot genres, if you're looking around at the moment thinking, I'm going to write in a new genre, what's hot? He is the man to answer that question. Talking of which, I need to ask you a question. Are you doing a follow-up to The Cabin in the Woods?
No, I might do a follow-up to The House in the Woods.
The House in the Woods. I knew, as I said, The Cabin in the Woods, I thought that was that horror film, wasn't it? That we both watched at the BBC. The House in the Woods.
Yeah, I am. That's on my list. Probably and then might be the next book I write. So it's going to be called A Place to Bury Strangers, I think, which I think is a pretty cool title.
That's a very cool title.
Yeah, so that's I've got an idea for it. So that would be the one that I do next, I think.
Good. That's you moving into a genre, which I think is a commercial decision as well as something you wanted to do artistically.
Oh yeah,
you certainly have looked at people who are selling large numbers of books in that genre.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and there's no question. We've mentioned Louise already. Barry Hutchison as J.D. Kirk, doing really well. Plenty of authors in that space who are, especially in the UK. It's very big in the UK. So, that was a combination of I would like to write that kind of book, and I know there's a big market for them. So
and you mentioned Jasper Joffrey earlier. Joffrey Books. He has quite a few authors who write into that area, and
he does
very well indeed.
Yep.
Good. Okay. Well, look, I should be sunning myself as this is on. Are you going away as well?
I am. I'm going to Lowestoft. So you're going to France. I'm going to Lowestoft. Yeah. So I won't be sunning myself. I'll probably be dodging seagull poo probably and rain clouds. But yes, have a lovely time in France. I'll be thinking of you as I shiver on the beach.
I'll be on the Côte d'Azur. You'll be on the end of the world, as it's called. It's as far east as you can go in the UK, Lowestoft, isn't it? I think
it is. Yes.
Next step, Holland. Good. Very interesting. But I'm back for the webinar, and I can't wait to get Alex onto the SPFU as one of our guest lecturers on Wednesday. So hopefully we'll see you then. Until then, all that remains for me to say is it's a goodbye from him.
And a goodbye from me. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Get show notes, the podcast archive, and free resources to boost your writing career at selfpublishingshow.com. Join our thriving Facebook group at selfpublishingshow.com/Facebook. Support the show at patreon.com/self-publishing show. And join us next week for more help and inspiration so that you can make your mark as a successful indie author. Publishing is changing, so get your words into the world and join the revolution with the Self-Publishing Show.